The cancel culture is getting absolutely ridiculous now. We have the middle-class, arrogant liberals now telling working-class, ordinary people that we're going to tell you how to live your life because we want to protect you, because you are victims. So, this is Flora Gill. She's a daughter of Amber Rudd. She's also a journalist. She's your typical middle-class, privileged young kid who has written in the Times today and yesterday saying that we're not the baddies. You know, my generation, the young middle-class liberals. We're just trying to protect the victims and the poor because, you know, people are stupid, they can't look after themselves, obviously. Now, in today's show, we're going to talk about this with someone very special. We have the comedian Jeff Norcott on the show, who is an openly a conservative-leaning, pro-Brexit, working-class a comedian, obviously. So we're going to go to him and see what his views are on this whole cancel culture and everything that's been happening in our country. Right now we're joined by Jeff Norcott, one of the best comedians in this country. Welcome to the show, Jeff. How are you?
I'm not bad, Maya. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. So you are openly a conservative-leaning, pro-Brexit comedian.
Shamefully, brazenly.
No,
Some would
yeah.
say.
I mean, are you brave or are you just a masochist asking for trouble?
Well, I think the thing is I'm just in line with a lot of people. That has always been, I've been speaking about it for a long time now. And I suppose right at the beginning, one of the thoughts was I just found it a bit fatuous and a bit sort of politically, intellectually immature that there was this huge sort of cohort of people in Britain that weren't represented comedically. And I didn't start voting Conservative till 2010. And then it was about 2013. And I just thought, yeah, that's an interesting thing to talk about. It's almost something funny about the idea that morally one side is pure and the other aren't, especially when you're dealing with, roughly equal parts of the country. Yeah. So I think like in comedy, moral certainty is in itself quite funny.
That's a good point. I mean, both of us are from kind of working class backgrounds. I grew up on a council estate, and I was told as I grew up that it is black and white. You got one side, the Tories are always evil, Labour are always good, and that's all you have to care about. You don't have to care about
during Iraq, even during the expenses scandal.
Yeah.
The thing that happened in the noughties, I think, interestingly, was that both of those things were squarely challenged. Like it kind of proves like the longer you're in government, most political parties end up involved in some sort of shady activity. So we had Iraq, we had the expenses scandal, and I think that we often forget now the expenses scandal, how formative that was. There were all the MPs I think that went to prison were Labour politicians. Yeah. So they sort of had their hands in the till, and I think certainly for a while it dispelled that idea that that they were the goodies and all Tories were like Sith lords or something.
I mean, they wish they were that competent to be like Sith lords.
Well, I mean, the only thing I'd say about Sith lords is that they do have a plan. They're willing to grasp the nettle. They're willing to do the difficult things that need to be done. And for everything that's said about the Galactic Empire, they certainly had an approach to streamlining that I would like to have heard more of.
It's true, but it was also very centralized. But anyway, apart from Star Wars, the one thing is that I mean, we're both conservative leaning, but at the same time, sometimes we criticize the Tory side, the government, and we don't. There's no blind faith, but I don't really see it much from the other side. And I think one of the problems I noticed as I grew up, especially in the noughties, was this concept of what New Labour created. There was some good, there was some bad, but the whole Blairism and everything changed the left up to a point where you now have still the consequences. You have the privileged middle class kind of urban people, the avocado eating, sandal wearing people, telling other working class people what to do.
Sandals are Lib Dems, actually, just on a point of technicality. I think avocados are left wing, sandals are very Lib Dems.
Although I need to stop saying avocado when I make jokes, because my subscribers, some of them actually like avocado, and they're like, why are you attacking us?
Listen, it has its place. I just don't think it should be at lunchtime. I think it should be on the side of something. It makes me suspicious about people if they're willing to make it the focal point of any given meal. But yeah, I think that something definitely changed with the left during that time. And I think that what the Blair years sort of masked over was that there's some people for whom being left wing and voting Labour is an expression of self. It's very important to them to feel morally kind of pure, and they didn't get to feel that during the Blair year. I mean, this is one of the things I find interesting about the left. You ask most people, they say, well, Iraq was terrible, and I say, well, did you vote Labour in 2005? And they're like, yeah. Oh, what? So that was the first election after.
Yeah.
I said, well, I'd never vote Tory, would I? I thought, well, you could have at least, abstained or spoiled your ballot paper if you felt that strongly about it. But it's certainly, this idea that working class conservatism is like a new phenomenon. And Labour haven't won the popular vote in England since 2001. So this is long running for them. But I just wonder the way, the kind of setup that you describe at the moment, the predominance of liberal middle class types, whether they can ever have a manifesto, set of values that really win a majority in Britain ever again, because they're torn between two very different factions within their own party. The Conservative Party, at the very least, can pull together at the last minute because they love power. Ultimately, they'll do what it takes to get in there. Whereas the Labour Party, there is a sort of ideological need for moral certainty that sometimes holds them back politically.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think one issue is when we're talking about this kind of the new culture that we talk about, the cancel culture, the woke side, it's not necessarily the socialist side, it's the liberal left middle classes. So they're not always all Labour. So you have Flora Gill, the daughter of Amber Rudd, and the journalist. She wrote an article today or yesterday in the Times saying, in a very patronising way, saying that, we're not the baddies, we're just trying to protect the poor and the victims, and as if like all working class people, all ethnic minorities, are all victims, and the privileged white middle classes are there to protect them. What is happening?
Well, I think that's a mistake. Like, one of the narratives that's failed for Labour for quite some time now, certainly since the middle of the Blair years, was that a lot of people don't want to think that they've got like terrible lives. Like, it was one of the mistakes with Corbyn as well, was that obviously there were people that had struggled during austerity, but a lot of people, their lives were okay, and they didn't want to constantly have this narrative whereby only the state could save them. And again, when it comes to cancel culture, there was this attempt over the last couple of weeks to say that, well, rich and powerful people haven't been cancelled, so therefore it doesn't exist. I'm like, well, they don't generally pay speeding fines either, but that doesn't mean that speeding fines don't exist. Like, if you've got a good lawyer, and if you've already, in a way, certainly with J.K. Rowling with the transgender debate, she's almost like one of the only people that could have taken a stand, because anybody else was susceptible, but she is, beyond reach. So the fact that powerful people can, have another life after being monstered online, it almost proves the point in a way. There was an example. There was a guy that worked for a charity in Manchester, done loads of good work over the years, getting kids out of street gangs and involved in violent crime. He'd won an MBE, right? And all he did was he questioned like the political wing of Black Lives Matter in the UK. And there was a petition of around 450 people that got him out of his position, right? Which is astonishing. Like, it's almost like what, like, say for even if he did have like the wrong opinion, so to speak, you come down to the point, like, what do we want? Do we want people that say the right thing or do the right thing? And this guy's been doing the right thing to the point where he's got an MBE for it. So I think that idea that I think it's a bit reductive and simplistic. Yeah, maybe cancel is an imperfect word, but it's the fear of cancellation as much as the act of it that's kind of moderating public discourse.
You're right, and it's weird because the one thing they always do, I've discovered, is that the left always end up eating itself. And J.K. Rowling, until yesterday, we were criticizing her because she was like proper Ramona, saying Brexit is bad.
Yeah, I did.
And now we're defending her.
I mean, I did joke about her on the MASH report. I was saying, I was saying that no wonder she wants a second referendum, because she loves a sequel. She'll rinse it out. You have 8 books. So yeah, well, this is the weird thing about the culture war, isn't it? You suddenly find that someone can then become a hero or a villain. To be honest, I sort of never thought that J.K. Rowling was a bad person. It was just on that issue. I had
wrong.
A different view to her. But I think you're right. I think the left does like devouring its own, and a lot of people say that right wing comedy is harder. I'm honestly at the point where I don't think that's true, because left wing comedians, just like the Labour Party itself, have to have this fragile coalition of what they really think versus what could get them being trending or getting attacked online for not being pure. And it's I sort of describe it a bit like when the left go for the left, it's almost like a revenge beating, where like in a community where you kneecap someone and then they have to walk around the community, and it's almost like, by the way, say the wrong thing, something could happen to your kneecaps, and they're almost less interested. I don't get that much stick off the left these days, because they sort of think, well, he's a Tory, they're evil and they're heartless, he's gone. But what they're trying to do is keep their own side intact, like all extremists in a way.
Because you mentioned that there's a misperception that, at least historically, it might have been true that right-wing comedy isn't as funny because when right-wing was traditional conservative establishment in the past, like across the world, across the West,
Yeah.
so it's always about punching down, punching up. Obviously, punching down isn't funny, it's not nice. But actually, these days, the roles have reversed anyway. So when right-wingers are actually kind of making jokes, they're not really joking about, like, ordinary kind of poor people. They're talking about, like, actually the left are becoming powerful. So we are making
Well,
fun
yeah,
of
I
J.K.
mean, you
Rowling.
talk about punching up, and I often get that thing thrown at me. And I also think, well, punching up relies on the concept of power. And you go, well,
Yeah.
where is the power? You can have political power, but in certainly the last 10 years, social media has made cultural power another institution that you could hit on. And it's a very strange idea when people sort of say, oh, you're a right-wing comedian, or do a conservative joke then. I go, well, what does that even mean? Like, I can't really make a joke about my love of small government. I can do a joke about my hatred of big government.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can political comedy, right? And this is the same with your left or right wing. Is it's always about attacking the ideas and personalities on the other side, right? That is the way you do it. No left wing comedian has ever got huge laughs out of their love of kind of controlled, managed economies and kind of like state nationalisation.
Yeah, it's always about the other side.
There's a challenge. Any left-wing comedian, say something funny about being pro-nationalisation. I think fair enough. If you can, fair enough. But yeah, I think it's a reductive idea, and I think it's always been different in the States, whereby individualism, which obviously more squarely associated with the right. A lot of American comics have always dabbled in that. You take responsibility for yourself and who you are. You own your mistakes. You don't claim to be the victim. So I think I think in some ways the American circuit has already done that, and I think that there are more and more. I mean, there's only a few out. Like there's me, there's a couple of other comics that are openly conservative, whereas most people who are people like Constantine Kissing, Andrew Doyle. They're not conservative voters, right? No. But they're associated with being right wing just because they don't go with the orthodoxies.
It's kind of true because I was on trigonometry. Constantine and Francis interviewed me, and we did have this chat. And he's not necessarily conservative. He's a bit of a mix. And he called himself centrist, and I don't believe in the center. So I said, you're more like a libertarian leaning kind of like me, basically. But it is true. But they're going after them. Has anyone tried to cancel you yet, or?
No, not really. I mean, the thing is that as a person, I'm reasonably conciliatory to begin with, right? So every thought I have, every argument I form, I'm quite balanced in my own way. So I tend to pitch it, but that's always who I've been, and it sometimes gets misconstrued on the right for he's pussyfooting around it. He's just kind of trying to suck up to the left and stuff. It's not really. That's just who I am. That's always the way that I've been, because my idea has always been I want the audience to be a coalition. I want to get as many people laughing at an idea as possible, and in a way I want the left. I like reluctant laughs, right? I like a left
awkwardness,
and then hating themselves for it. So that's just my approach. Other people have different approaches. So there's a couple of. I mean, I remember when I was first on the MASH report. What happens is when you first come to people's awareness, they give it a go and they see how they get on, and they sort of realise that it doesn't work. But I've been through a lot of that online, and it was like aversion therapy. And I'm not going to say that I don't care at all now, but I've sort of weathered the storm a bit. And I do think as well, if they ever come for me, I would, I'd rather not be a comedian than be a comedian that says sorry dishonestly.
Well, you have to get used to it, because when they cancel comedy, you're going to have to do your comedy shows in like basements and like underground secret house parties.
or on laptops.
On laptop, basically.
It's already happening. There's more and more comedians who are either contrarian or right wing. It's interesting that this sort of sub-circuit have been quite proactive in setting up Patreons and doing Zoom online gigs. So I wonder if this is where it begins.
Yeah, the lockdown actually created opportunities, which is really weird.
Well, that's a very conservative thing, Maya, isn't it? Something changes.
Yeah,
the market
always provides.
Adapts. But you don't get me wrong. I mean, like I get a buzz out of like a big room of people and knowing that there's, because in comedy audiences, whatever people feel about diversity as a concept, it always makes a better gig. The more age difference, the more gender difference. You just want every kind of thing, because you can then sort of like surf a number of different waves. Like, well, the one thing you don't want is a room full of people agreeing with you.
Well, in that case, next interview, when it's in person, we're going to have like a live audience to make it easier.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, because it could just steer you. You can kind of sense little things in the room changing. You can do it. You can do a lot online, and it'll be interesting. You say about comedy being cancelled. I mean, we're now looking at doing it in open air venues and stuff. And so you might end up being cancelled by somebody that just heard it on the wind. If the wind was blowing in one direction, they weren't even at the gig, but they just had the window to their flat open. They heard your joke and complained about you online.
Yeah, well, it's fine because people like me and you are still the optimists and positives, so we're going to find the opportunities in everything. We're not doom and gloom people, so.
No, I mean, I am. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think what I've said a few times. One of the things I think makes me conservative, and this would sound odd to left-wing people, is that I'm really optimistic. Like I sort of think, leave people to their own devices. I think things will be all right. I think this is a great country. I think it is dynamic. It's diverse. Yeah, I think now I might be proved to be wrong on all of that stuff, right? But what I don't like is being held in contempt for my views. Like people think that my politics are coming from a bad place. Actually, if you drill down, it's from somewhere that I think is overall quite positive, really.
Yeah, we all want good things, but a lot of people don't see it. They think it's black and white. But we shall see how the rest of this lockdown, if it's still going on, goes. And hopefully, do you have any planned gigs coming up, like real gigs?
Yeah, well, the main thing is the podcast, what most people think, where I sort of try and come at, social and political issues from,
where can they find you?
Revolutionary angle of, a normal person's or an ordinary reaction to thing. And then there's the Patreon. I've announced I'm going to be doing an online tour on the early part of August. It's a brand new show about everything that's been happening over the last few months. So it'll be an hour of stand-up. Because I can't go to the Edinburgh Fringe, it'll basically be in your front room. And it's called Jeff Norcott's Fringe Benefits, right? Because I needed a name. And that'll be it. So look out for that in the early part of August. And the tickets will be on sale for that this week, Thursday of this week.
Thanks again for coming on the show. Any last few words?
No, just obviously we've got to wear face masks now. So apparently that means if I have any reservations about that, I want people to die in the usual way that social media brings things down to this binary thing. I'm like Thanos, basically. He wants to click his fingers and make people die. It's not. I mean, look, it's not a great time for a libertarian, but hopefully these measures are as brief as can be.
Absolutely. Thanks again for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Cheers, Maya.